Everyday Use by Alice Walker. Reader Response Criticism by SkittleMLake.
The reader response theory considers the reader's reactions and interpretations to the literature as vital to understanding the meaning of the text. This theory states that any given texts are open to multiple interpretations. Reader response focuses on the reader and their experience reading a literary work. This theory states that multiple readings of one work can produce multiple interpretations, and all these interpretations can be equally right. Reader response criticism does not believe works to be a separate closed entity, but rather thousands of threads separated by holes that readers must fill in with their own experiences, observations, personal meanings, and expectations. In contrast to other theories that focus primarily on the author or content of work, reader response theory stands in total opposition to the theories of formalism and new criticism. Reader response criticism argues that literature should be viewed as a performing art in which the reader creates their own text-related.
The domain of literature has a vast line representing a cluster of literary theories. Each theory has come from a different school of thought, forming a strict sense of systematic study of literature. Reader response criticism is another literary theory that focuses on the reader's or the audience's experience of any literary work. Modern reader response criticism began in the late 1960s, particularly in the US and Germany, in work by Norman Holland, Stanley Fish, Wolfgang Iser, Hans Robert Haus, and Roland Barthes. Reader response was the first theory that gave importance to the readers instead of focusing on all the attention primarily on the author or the form of the work. It opposes the reader's role as a passive consumer of the literary text and does not ground itself on creating objective meanings.
There are strengths and weaknesses that comes to reader response criticism. Some strengths are that it leaves messages up to the reader with the interpretation from past experiences that the reader may have. The reader can also contribute to the story by processing it in their own ways and being able to relate to some certain characters. For example, people who may have a mother who is open with how she felt or is a mother can relate to Mama in the story. Some weaknesses are that readers can have different interpretations and can cause many disagreements with certain stories. The story can also end up being much more confusing if there's more reader response criticism needed. If a reader does not relate to a certain character or how it works, it can be harder for them to understand why a character acts a certain way throughout a story.
Everyday Use by Alice Walker focuses mainly on the theme of heritage versus identity. When Dee comes home, she expresses that she has a new fascination with her African background. She has a new African name, a new African clothing style, and brings another African friend with her. She comes to take pictures of her home and artifacts that give her credibility as a woman who has come up from nothing. However, in reality, she has made it as far as she has because of her mother and background. Her mother and her community raised the money that sent Dee to college and gave her the opportunity to become something more. She wants the quilts to show off her African background, while Maggie, her sister, wants them to use and cherish. While Dee is trying to get in touch with her African background and heritage, she is losing sight of and ignoring her identity. She should be acknowledging where she came from and who has made her success possible. The plot of Everyday Use gradually entices the reader more and more by going further in depth in the backgrounds and of the mother's views of Dee and Maggie. In the beginning of this short story, the mom imagines Dee wanting to reunite and acknowledge her mother and her role in her success. Dee is looked at as the smarter, more successful sister, while Maggie is looked at as lesser and is often walked on. The mother in this story gives more credit to Dee for being smart and doing something better with her life, although her perception shifts halfway throughout the story. She realizes how senseless Dee has become and notices that Maggie deserves more of her attention and gratitude. This switch in the mother's perception is presented when the mother takes the quilts that Dee wants to take out of her hands and puts them into Maggie's. By the end of the story, the mother gives more credit to Maggie, who has had a harder life. Maggie is getting married, and the mother finds reassurance in the fact that she will continue the family and heritage.
Mama is the narrator of the story and describes herself as a big-boned woman with hands that are rough from years of physical labor. She's a very hard-working, strong, loving mother who is sometimes threatened by her two daughters. Mama is brutally honest and often crucial of Dee and Maggie. She resents the education and sense of superiority that Dee has developed over the years. Maggie is the younger daughter who still lives with her mother. Severely burned in a house fire, her scared appearance hides her sympathetic nature. She lives with Mama and is virtually untouched by the outside world. She is shy, lacks confidence, and uneducated as well. Dee is the object of jealousy among her family members. Dee's judgmental nature has affected Mama and Maggie. The desire for Dee's approval runs deep in both Maggie and Mama, as it appears in Mama's daydreams. She is educated, worldly, and deeply determined.
Throughout the story, everyday use, there are many symbols that represent the main ideas. For one example, the quilt is a symbol of history and heritage that takes place within the short story. Due to the fact that the quilts have been made by past family members and were given throughout the family line. This is what represents the bond between the daughter and their mother, which is what Mama's searching for. The bonds between her daughters were more meaningful than any sort of education or proper lifestyle that Dee presented, proposing the idea that the quilts are more of a symbol of meaningfulness in a story. Another symbol was the yard, which was a symbol of starting over and moving on from the past, which happened to be the house fire from their previous house. This caused traumatic wounds and burns that forever changed Maggie's life. She was then seen as the ugly duckling of the family since she was burned and uneducated, unlike her sister. This caused her to feel less, so the yard worked as a symbol of overcoming the hardships of her life. Both her wounds and burns were altering events in her life that forever changed, symbolizing the start of new growth.
Both allegories and myths can also be used to symbolize things, often being conveyed feelings. The yard can be used to show privacy and free space, comparing it to things that Mama finds comforting and stuff. The yard is also used to talk about shortcomings. Mama trying to talk to Dee about things that Dee is very closed off about. The quilt can carry myths about past family members and how they felt with memories and the heritage that is very unknown throughout the family. Style is how the author writes a story to make it seem a certain way. In everyday use, three major parts that the author used: language, diction, and phrases. The language used conveys certain thoughts and feelings that can also influence certain emotions. There's some focus towards tension from when Dee forces Mama to choose who to give items to, even though Dee knows very well that Maggie wants the items. The style can appeal to different readers, making different readers feel different with feelings that can be separate due to style choice, causing certain readers to relate more, while others may not understand how a certain character may feel.
The tone of a story is the model of the voice expressing a particular feeling or mood. In this specific story, Everyday Use, Mama's tone was the one that changed. She demonstrated that she went from seeing her eldest daughter as the most successful in terms of education and lifestyle, which was then pushing away her younger daughter. She soon realized that her younger daughter had become more successful in the ideals of what's important in life. The language of a story is the style of a piece of writing or speech. The author's structure within this passage is what demonstrates the language. The structure of the story is broken up into events to show how drastic Mama's feelings towards her daughters change throughout the plot. This was an important tactic for the author to use to be able to demonstrate the usefulness of proper language structure in a story.
The setting is set in the late 1960s when many African Americans were struggling. The time period was also an era when groups of all ideologies, some peaceful and some violent, emerged. The Black Panthers and Black Muslims were groups created to resist what they saw as a white-dominated society. During this time, many Blacks sought to establish themselves as a visible and unified group to take control of how their group was named Black.
Point of view. What is it? Point of view is the narrator's position in relation to the story being told. In this story, it is told in first person point of view. First person is narrative and allows us as the reader to portray the story through the character's perspective. In this case, Mama is the one who's telling the story. And now for the analysis questions. How do the characters enhance the theme of the story? Dee is the only member of the household to receive a formal education. Her younger sister Maggie has a completely different interpretation to African American culture. A conflict occurs, highlighting these differences, showing that culture and heritage are parts of everyday life. Question number 2. What experiences or thoughts does the text invoke? Dee and Maggie have a dispute over the quilts, and then when Dee says they would be destroyed, Mama looks at Maggie, hugs her, and snatches the quilt from Dee. Question number 3. How does the symbolism of the quilts develop a theme? The quilts symbolize a testament to a family's history of pride and struggle, as well as the differences between women of different generations. Question 4. How does the author's tone of the story develop such theme? Conflict between Dee and Maggie shifts Mama's actions into not wanting to allow Dee to have the quilts, for she's not ready to embrace her heritage. And finally, question 5. How does the setting affect the plot of the story? By having the setting of the story in a rural shack where Maggie and her mom live, readers can see how Dee's attempt to appropriate their everyday items is ridiculous.